What is the best film ever made? Is it The Godfather? Is it Shawshank Redemption? Is it Joshua and the Promised Land?
No! No!
Truly, there's no way of answering this question, right? Well, there's one film that's held this title for the longest time. Citizen Kane by Orson Welles, released in 1941. Almost universally, it's been acknowledged as the greatest film of all time, with the American Film Institute heralding it as such. I remember the first time I had heard of the film was probably when I was in middle school. My brother asked me that very question, and knowing my dumbass, I probably said something like Spider-Man. Shout out Willem Dafoe. But to my surprise, he said Citizen Kane. Being the film buff that I was and never hearing of this film before, I thought this was gonna be one of those overrated old-ass movies that the old film heads raved about when it first came out. It's like people calling Michael Jordan the GOAT. Like, that man played against plumbers and construction workers. Ain't no way he was that good. I did some research though before I watched the film. Yeah, my lazy ass actually did some work for once. 100% on Metacritic, 9 Oscar nominations, and most importantly, a restaurant in Missouri called Citizen Kane's Steakhouse. Needless to say, I was very much anticipating greatness from this film, given all its acclamations. So did it fail to meet my absurdly high expectations and suck complete dick? Nah, it was actually really good. It's one of those films where you immediately understand why people put it in such high regards. It's even more impressive when you consider that this was essentially Orson Welles' debut, catapulting him as one of the most promising young voices in Hollywood. Undoubtedly, this film sits in the pantheon of one of the greatest debut films of all time, right up there next to 12 Angry Men, Reservoir Dogs, and Perfect Blue. The fact that he made this when he was 26 really makes me rethink my life. Like, I'm doing something wrong, man. The film centers around Mr. Charles Foster Kane, who we see passes away in his isolated mansion Xanadu, uttering the iconic word, in the several newspapers covering his death, many of which are in different languages, it paints Kane as this otherworldly figure, one of immense status and fame. After this, we get a newsreel of his life, highlighting both his accomplishments as a generational newspaper tycoon and his failures as a politician. Basically, it acts as a TikTok summary of his life for the kids who can't watch anything over a minute. From here, the film takes on a documentary style of storytelling, like the film Waltz with Bashir, as Jerry Thompson interviews people who knew Kane personally to discover the meaning of his last words, first starting with his second wife, Susan Alexander Kane, who's now become an alcoholic after her failed opera career. After a not-so-friendly welcoming being told to get out, Thompson then reads banker Walter Thatcher's memoirs at the library, where he reads of Kane's upbringing. We see young Charles playing outside in the snow as he throws snowballs at his home. Inside, his parents are finalizing a deal with Thatcher to raise Charles, providing for his education and essentially acting as his adoptive parent. When he's told he's getting on a train ride with him, Charles asks why his mom isn't joining them, in confusion and disbelief. At the thought of being separated from his parents, his home, he hits Thatcher in the chest with his sled and runs away. The first scene we see of them without Charles' parents is at Christmas, a day full of celebration and joy. Yet there isn't any here, as everything that makes the day special is missing. Friends, family, life. Time passes and we see an older Charles inherit and run the newspaper company The Inquirer, in which he aims to fight for the truth and nothing but the truth. Here we see a young, ambitious man who fights for those who are unprivileged, despite him being a privileged man himself. He doesn't care how much money he has, he only cares for the people who can't necessarily fight back. He certainly represents the noble and righteous here, which makes his eventual fall off all the more disappointing. It's honestly really cool and interesting when we get to see an influential person's origin, as it leaves us with a good impression of their initial beliefs, and if it contrasts the end person, it gives us the juxtaposition of the two as well. One thing that caught my eye during this section of the film was the cinematography. This is a beautifully shot film, but not just for 1941, but just in general. There are shots in this film that would 100% pass off in any film made today. In fact, it looks better than around 80% of Hollywood films released recently. There are so many different techniques used in this film that it's just completely mind-blowing that they even thought of it. But that doesn't mean that everything was that special. While this film used a lot of clever tricks like matte drawings and optical printers to make the backgrounds look more real, did you know that this is one of the first films to fully utilize low-angle shots? Isn't that just crazy to think about? In this modern era of filmmaking, low-angle shots are a given. They're such an important and essential shot to have to convey ideas like size and power. And it's even crazier when you think about how there was a time where these shots weren't even used. Bernstein's interview discusses the newspaper business and the origins of it, as we see the humble beginnings of Charles' career. Again, we notice the drive that he has, as he's practically working all day to deliver the news to the good people. While not much happens in this section, the most important part of it is undoubtedly the inception of the Declaration of Principles, in which it explains how Charles and the Enquirer will deliver the news honestly and fight for the rights of the citizens. As they hand it over to be put on the front page, Leland asks to keep the original copy, saying it could become an important document. Actually, I take it back, because the most important part of this section is the relationship between Charles and Leland. They're essentially brothers, with them meeting in college and working together ever since. From what we see, they both believe in and want to accomplish the same things with the Enquirer, but like great brothers should do, they push each other, even if it may hurt them. At the party, Leland talks to Bernstein about the new employees that Charles poached from the Chronicle, wondering if they'll manipulate him, institutionalize him. Although Bernstein tells him Charles will fix them, Leland is still skeptical about it all, which boils over later in the film. As they welcome Charles back to America after a trip abroad with a trophy, he looks anxious as he awkwardly hands Miss Townsend, the society editor, a note with an announcement from him. Quickly accepting the gift, we see him rush out of the building as he rejoins the niece of the president, Emily Norton, his newly wedded wife. By the end of the interview, Bernstein suggests that maybe Rosebud was something that Kane lost, as he was a man that lost almost everything he had. His interview with Leland goes further in depth at Kane's biggest mistakes, not just as a husband, but as a human. It seems that, surprise surprise, his relationship with Emily was pretty bad. We see that, like many other relationships, it starts off great, with the two clearly loving each other and sharing very doting compliments. Then as time passes, it reaches a point where the two won't even talk to each other, or even look at each other. In comes Susan Alexander, who's both hurting from a toothache and laughing at Kane after a passing car splashes him with muddied water, ruining his best Sunday suit. Feeling bad for him, she offers him warm water at her place, which he begrudgingly accepts. Just based on their conversation and Susan's home, we can see a very clear difference in class and wealth, yet the dialogue sounds so natural and human. His chemistry with Susan, unlike Emily, feels genuine. She mentions she wanted to be a singer, or at the very least wanted that because her mother wanted it for her, talking about how she thought grand opera would be for her. He asks if she can sing for him, and after some reluctance, she agrees, singing for him at the parlor and playing the piano. There's just something about the relationship that digs deeper, and I think this explains it perfectly.
No, I don't know many people.
I know too many people. I guess we're both lonely.
The undeniable highlight of this film is the title character, Charles Foster Kane, who is arguably one of the greatest film characters in film history. While every performance in this film is great, Joseph Cotton, Dorothy Cummingore, Everett Sloane, Orson Welles gives a generational performance as the titular Mr. Kane. The way he's able to portray every emotion shows a clear understanding of Kane as a character and a mastery of the craft. Just from the speech at the campaign, the control in his voice not only is impressive to watch, but it perfectly fits the character. Although he has that booming voice presence, he never seems intimidating. Instead, he's incredibly charismatic. In all honesty, he's almost everything you want in a politician. Almost. After the speech, the tension between Kane and Emily boils over as she receives a letter from Susan, becoming aware of their affair. Turns out Jim W. Geddes, Kane's political rival, forced her to send the letter exposing their affair. This effectively ends his political career after it's released to the public, which seems pretty unrealistic today. The most significant scene in this section of the film, however, is the confrontation between Kane and Leland, in which Leland shares his dislikes of Kane's ethics. While he's drunk, he still has some good points. Although Kane wanted to be truthful with the Enquirer, he himself isn't. He's hypocritical, writing and fighting for the working man, yet he treats them as his workers, his peons. Leland detests Kane's control, restrictiveness, and asks to be moved to Chicago to escape it. After first denying his request, Kane reluctantly gives in and sends him there. From here, Emily divorces Kane, and Kane marries Susan shortly after. His relationship with Susan is far more complex, as he's a lot more involved in her life than he was with Emily, albeit too involved. As soon as they get married, Kane builds an opera house in Chicago for her to perform in, even giving her singing lessons to hone her skills. But we see that these lessons don't go smoothly, as the opera teacher is constantly yelling at her for failing to hit the right notes. After the performance in Chicago, we find Kane visiting the Enquirer there, where Leland, who's at this point passed out drunk, was writing his scathing review of the play, calling Susan an amateur singer at best. The interesting part of all this is that Kane decides to finish the review, not by rewriting it to be a positive, encouraging one, but by continuing it in the same scathing tone. It's puzzling as to why he did this. Leland tells Thompson Kane did this to show him that he was an honest man, one without any biases or agendas. But I don't know if this is true. To me, it acts more as a reflection of how Kane has grown to become a more cynical, bitter person, opposed to the ambitious, hungry man he was when he started working for the company. Given the responsibilities he's inherited by becoming a powerful figure, it shows how power can corrupt those with good intents. After he wakes up, Leland is informed by Kane that he's fired, as he continues with the review, not even looking at Leland when he tells him. Thompson's interview with Susan Alexander is the most damning of them all, however. She essentially tells him that she never got what she truly wanted. Everything was all Kane's idea. We were hinted at this idea before, specifically when they got married. When talking about her future singing career, he always refers to it as our career, saying things like,
We're gonna be a great opera star.
and even answers
We certainly are.
when Susan is asked if she's going to be singing at the Metropolitan. Although she initially seems thrilled at the idea of it, clearly Kane has had an influence on her feelings toward the matter. We see more of the singing lessons that Susan endured for Kane. As she's constantly getting criticized for her skills by the instructor, Kane watches in the background until he snaps when she's told that she can't sing. He yells at the instructor for berating Susan, telling him,
It's not your job to give Mrs. Kane your opinion of her talents.
while it may seem sweet to see him defend her, it also feels delusional. Imagine me telling Tarantino he doesn't know films because he doesn't like something I do. Like, where's the logic there? Relating this to myself, as much as I would like to be great at everything, sometimes I know that this isn't always going to be the case, like ice skating. Here, Kane certainly doesn't share this belief and forces the instructor and, crucially, Susan to endure. During the play, the only person intently watching is Kane, as Leland rips at the booklet, Bernstein falls asleep, and a lady next to Kane calls it boring. By the end of it, we hear a quiet applause, not one of congratulations, but one of pity and polite disapproval. Upon hearing this, Kane does his best to elevate the crowd, enthusiastically clapping and even standing, hoping to spark a standing ovation. Instead, it dies out, as he's left as the only one cheering for her. The day after the reviews come out acts as the initial thorn in their relationship, the beginning of the end, essentially. Susan, after reading the interview from the Inquirer, feels betrayed, and rightfully so. It honestly hurts seeing her in this pain, knowing that Kane was the one who likely wrote the bulk of the review. What's worse is that he shows no empathy for her. Instead, he seems disdainful. When Susan understandably wants to quit, saying, "I never wanted this in the first place," Kane emptily tells her, "You will continue with your singing. I won't be made ridiculous." What a shitty thing to say to your significant other. It's like when you drop out and your parents are like, what am I supposed to tell my friends? Am I supposed to tell them my son's a dropout? It's just like, come on man, that's just such a backwards way of seeing the situation. Here Susan sees him for who he truly is, a bad person, as the shadow he casts onto her frightens her, making her curl up in fear. We also get the end of his and Leland's relationship, as he gets mail from him, inside which is the rip check Kane sent after firing him and the original Declaration of Principles, which he rips, signifying how much Leland now matters to him. After many more performances, all of which get poor reviews from critics, the stress of it all gets to Susan as she tries to commit suicide. Despite this, Kane still doesn't understand her pain and suffering. He tells the doctor that,
Guess the strain of preparing for the new operas excited and confused her.
and the doctor just says, "Sure buddy, that's what it was." Once she wakes up, she tries her best to tell him how she was feeling, yet he still doesn't see it. It's genuinely disheartening hearing her talk about how she felt unwanted every time she set foot on stage. It's a feeling that I resonate with a lot. Although I try my best to block it, sometimes the outside noise gets to me, and it discourages me from being myself. I feel out of place a fair amount, and I feel I don't always fit in. While I've met so many amazing people in my life and have a friend group that I love being around, there are times when I feel alone, like truly alone. Honestly, I think this Mac Miller lyric explains how I feel perfectly. Going back to the film, although he wants her to fight back, he ultimately gives in and tells her she doesn't have to fight them anymore. That's their loss. From here, the relationship deteriorates as the distance between them becomes synonymous with the space in the vast mansion they now live in. The differences in class, which at first was what brought them together, now creates a clear disconnect between the two, as Susan wants to go out in the city and have fun, while Kane almost needs to be isolated, as he both wants it and needs it to likely avoid any further controversies. In the end, it becomes too much for Susan to endure as she leaves him, despite his pleas for her to stay. He tells her that from now on, everything will be done how she wants it to be done. This almost seems to work until Kane tells her that
You can't do this to me.
Here Susan and, in turn, the audience finally understand the main plague of Kane's life: selfishness. He doesn't truly seem to believe what he's saying. Rather, he's only saying it for his own benefit. He's only saying it so that she doesn't leave him. Upon hearing this, she leaves him for good, freeing herself of her imprisonment. So, do I think this is the best film ever made?
Hell no!
This is far from a perfect film, and I'm not even nitpicking or anything like that. For one, the newspaper summary of his life at the beginning of the film was completely unnecessary. It would have been far more interesting to see all the information revealed progressively throughout the film, rather than some dumb obituary. Given how the beginning of the film creates this bigger-than-life image of Kane, it's best for us to see how this image is challenged during the duration of the film, rather than explaining it all at once. Sadly, as much as it is impressive as to how modern the film feels even after 83 years, it still is a product of its time. Honestly, this is something that I think every film is going to go through, unfortunately. With film technologies and overall filmmaking techniques improving, it's going to be something inevitable for cinema. Just take any Marvel movie. There's undoubtedly going to be a point in the future where we can't discern what's real and what's CGI, which is going to make older films like these look really bad. While revolutionary at the time, the cinematography in Citizen Kane is no longer unique, in my opinion, only historic. Obviously, this doesn't change the fact that it's still amazing. It's just that there's so many other films now that have cinematography that is better than this film's, as well as more unique. In defense of Citizen Kane, however, I do think this film has aged better than any other film I've seen. The ending shows why many revere this film as the greatest film of all time. After interviewing his butler, Raymond, we see Kane's separation from Susan left a deep, emotional hole in his heart as he tears her room apart, ripping at the walls and throwing the things he bought for her, till he comes across a snow globe and cries, uttering Rosebud before walking out of the room, passing his distressed workers. Raymond tells Thompson that Mr. Kane was a man who said many things, but many of which that were ultimately meaningless. After everything he's read, after all the interviews he's conducted, he concludes that the meaning of the word will remain a mystery. He doubts that it would have proven anything about Kane's life, let alone explain it. As the scene transitions to the workers burning his belongings, we see his childhood sled with Rosebud engraved in it. The final piece of the puzzle, right? Well, kind of. It certainly recontextualizes how we perceive Charles Foster Kane as a character. In the entirety of the film, we see him as this rich, powerful, yet selfish person. With the actions and decisions he's made, it's hard not to see him this way. Here we see a different man, one who desires to live a more peaceful, simpler life. Being his final words relate to his childhood, which was taken away from him. He clearly longs for it and hates how it was stripped of him. This almost entirely reshapes how we view him as a person. At first looking like a lie, everything he did for Susan now looks like it was from a genuine place of love, but because he never got any, he never knew how to show it. That's something to think about, honestly. How can someone who's missing that in life truly show love to others? It's almost as if he saw a younger version of himself in Susan. He saw the same ambition and loneliness, so almost to make amends with his old self, he tries to give her what he was missing in his life. Now, this doesn't change everything. At the end of the day, he still cheated on Emily and was incredibly forceful and controlling, but it at the very least gives us reason to be more sympathetic. I see this film as a cautionary tale of riches and how this doesn't always solve our problems. I, along with many other people, saw money as the solution to all my problems. Being a college student, life would be so much easier if I didn't have to worry about student loans and shit like that. I'd be able to do whatever I wanted without having to deal with the stress of managing my money. I could live my life without any insecurities. But as I see it now, this isn't the case. The fact of the matter is, money acts as a temporary solution to the major problems in my life. Sure, I could travel across the world and experience things I probably couldn't have without it, but that's not what life is about. For me personally, it's about making those genuine connections and creating memories with the people I love and cherish the most. It's about making mistakes and being okay with it. It's about learning how to be proud of yourself and loving people for who they truly are. In the end, Charles Foster Kane had everything in life except these things. He may have lived a life of immense profit and fame, but in turn, he was devoid of love for others and joy in life. While I still wish to make a reasonable amount of money in my life so that I can care for the people I hold closest to me, I'm content with the situation I'm in right now, knowing that I can never replace my loved ones and how I'll never take my friendships, my family, for granted ever again. Hi, if you made it up to this point in the video, I thank you for watching. This didn't take as long as the war video, but it definitely did take a little longer than the Longlegs review. It's been an idea that I've had for, honestly, probably since like the beginning of high school. I originally planned it to be a series. I actually have a list where I have like movies that are called or are in contention for the best films, and I was thinking about making this a series where I just talk about these movies and determine if I think that they're the best. But as of right now, I'm kind of on the fence if I am gonna do that, because it's just like such a long process, and I doubt that I'm gonna be as passionate about some of those films as I am with, let's say, like Citizen Kane or 12 Angry Men, The Godfather, like those kinds of films. So I don't know, it depends, but I don't know. Right now I'm in the middle about that. This is also probably going to be the last video I make in a while. Yeah, as you know, college is right around the corner, and I'd like to focus all of my, attention, my just like everything on that, on my work. And this is going to be a distraction, and I don't want it to, interfere with it. I am going to be still writing, I think, in my free time, but I won't be recording or editing or anything like that. I will say that the next video that I make is probably going to be either about fantasy films or Nosferatu when that comes out. So it's going to be a long time coming. The only reason I'm thinking about doing fantasy next is because I recently saw Princess Mononoke in theaters with a couple of my friends. It was actually my first time watching it in theaters. I usually watched it on TV with my Blu-ray, so it was a real treat, watching it on the big screen. But that kind of inspired me to write about it, and I think doing like a fantasy version of the war video is going to be a good way for me to talk about it. But I don't think I have much more to say. I just wanted this to be like a short update, I guess, on my current situation. And so, that's that. Just, thank you for watching. Stay safe, be kind, and be the best version of yourself.